I'm now going to just briefly give you an overview on the standards and regulation aspect, and we will then pause for questions. So, what's the problem out there with passwords? When smart devices are shipped with default passwords, it turns out that the majority of customers never change them. 60%, according to research, are still working away with those default passwords that were shipped with the original products. And that's, of course, a major security hazard. So where you see that level of what regulators and market people would call market failure, standards and regulation very quickly follow. In the technical environment, ETSI, the European standards body, really active, particularly in the mobile environment, has formulated EN 303645, and I'll dig into that in more detail in a minute. But this ETSI standard is really important because it forms the foundation of a lot of national and state level regulation that's starting to come through. We've got laws in California, Oregon in the United States, also proposals, a consultation on draft legislation that has started here in the United Kingdom. There are many other countries that are starting to get active in this space using the ETSI standard as an inspiration. Examples include Australia, Singapore, and others. There's, alongside the sort of the harder law and regulation and the technical standards, there's a lot of guidance, and a lot of that is I think very approachable, very engaging and accessible given the subject matter. We've produced some quick guides for this series, and also the Internet of Things Security Foundation has produced best practice guides. The National Cybersecurity Centre in the United Kingdom is a great resource for, again, very engaging materials that are written to be understood by the layperson. They're not, although they are written by really good technical experts, they are not requiring a high level of technical knowledge to be understandable to the average person. And in the US, you have the NIST, which operates and performs a similar function. Codes of practice, last year, the Department of Digital here in the United Kingdom produced a code of practice for Consumer IoT Security. Again, a pretty good read if you're into this sort of thing. And Australia has also publishing a code of practice, or there's one in draft. So why am I talking about this ETSI standard and what does it say? It's really forming a baseline of requirements for consumer Internet of Things devices. It's the first standard of its kind, and it's just a bringing together of widely considered good practices that can give a jumping off point. I think it's very much seen as a living document and a living process, because it contains this statement that as IoT consumer products become increasingly secure, it is envisioned that future revisions of the present document will mandate provisions that are currently recommendations. This has to be understood in the context of the ETSI standard being not having the force of law, it's a technical standard. So mandating in a technical sense, meaning that that is an expectation that people will follow. But the legislation is taking these provisions from a voluntary standard and making them mandatory at the national or state level. So today we are covering no universal default passwords. And this maps to an important provision in the ETSI standard. On Friday, we'll be taking you through software updates And I think next Monday or Tuesday, we will be talking about management of vulnerability reporting. But the ETSI standard has a lot more. And as it goes through, those elements have more and more sort of complexity. But all of them, I think if you're interested in cybersecurity, all of them are fairly sensible and fairly expected, about secure storage of security parameters, communication in a secure way, minimizing exposed attack surfaces, all very much expected good practice in the cybersecurity environment. So we're at very early stages in the United Kingdom here on draft regulation. Like many things, it has been delayed by the ongoing pandemic, so we're not as far through the legislative process as I believe was planned at this stage. But there's been a recent call for views, and that gives you a good sense of the direction of travel. It's very much mapped into the ETSI requirements, as I have said, and it applies to network connectable consumer IoT products, pretty wide scope. It's covering products that have one or more network interface that can receive and or transmit digital data. That could be almost anything. And of course, while it's confined to the consumer market and deliberately excludes smart devices in, say, healthcare or automotive environments where you've already got applicable legislation and regulation, those smart devices can be used in a domestic but also a business environment. And so whether you're primarily selling to businesses or buying these devices, these are very likely to be caught by the upcoming legislation. And the obligations are not just for the manufacturers, but also distributors to a lesser extent. This concept of a duty of care, which is quite in fashion for regulators in the digital environment. We're seeing it in the United Kingdom in the context of online harms, for example. That will be fixed, it is proposed, onto distributors of smart devices. And the crunch starts to come when you're looking across into the sanctions. And there are two things to say on this. One, that products that don't comply should not be supplied or made available to consumers on the market in the United Kingdom. So basically, your products will be banned, not able to be sold. And there is an escalating suite of sanctions which are under consideration. These would be fines. There's some proposals to sort of take concepts from privacy laws like turnover-based fines, which corporations have found very, very frightening and have been a big motivator to them to implement these laws, or removing products from the market, a very, potentially a harsh set of sanctions. On passwords specifically, these are banned, or in other words, universal default passwords are banned from the consumer IoT environment. Michael's going to take you through a lot of the detail. So it's really those devices that are shipped with admin username, admin as the password. And you've got the same credentials being used in multiple products and devices. So the passwords have to be unique by device or set by the user. And if they're default, they shouldn't be derivable or easily guessable. And Michael's going to take you through a few examples of good and not so good practice in this area. So I think when we ask the question why, I think it should be fairly straightforward to understand that if you've got millions of devices shipping with the same access authentication credentials, you're really going to be weakening the security of that product. And these are network connectable devices. So the weakest point on the network is going to be potentially an access point for an adversary to get data or put user safety even at risk. We've got physical devices, these can go wrong and cause physical harm. And that's a real difference between the Internet of Things, the smart environment, and what we've been traditionally used to in the internet, where the most harm you could get would be maybe financial loss. Perhaps at the worst, your computer might be irrecoverable, but you're not really going to be getting into a situation where you could be physically harmed by your device. So these poor practices are needed to change, and these laws can potentially help to secure businesses and business continuity. Please do look out for the resources in the series. I've got the link there to the Internet of Things Security Foundation pages, which have the quick guides. They're free to download. They are very much the companions to these webinar series. And vulnerablethings.com was launched last week as a vulnerability disclosure platform for smart devices, consumer smart devices. So do have a look at that if you're interested in either reporting or joining as an industry member.